Great. Okay. Well, hello, everybody. I'm just going to actually go straight to my share screen just because I think it's better just to go straight to the PowerPoint rather than you having to see my room here. So I'm just going to do that. And okay, so well, welcome. As you can see, there is a picture of me, and I'm Jo. And I'm also really pleased to be part of this today because it's such a great thing. And Mel and Amy, you've done a great job here organising this event for such a worthy cause. So it's so important. Yeah, so let's hope we get raising some money, which would be great. And my talk, well, yeah, so this is really for students, but of course, if you're a teacher, it's also going to be appropriate. I hope. I think it will. I've been teaching for 17 years plus, and for the last 8 years, I've been teaching university students, English for academic purposes. And like many of us, I'm doing the online transition as well. So I've been doing quite a lot of that, which is exciting. So Renata's talk was really fun and interesting, actually, to hear all about how to do that on Instagram and how to feel confident, really, with all of those things. So my talk, however, is going to be about reflective writing and practice, which is something that a lot of university students have to do. And it's a very particular style of writing. And I'm just going to move into my next slide. So I've put up here different forms of the word reflection, because obviously at university, thinking about vocabulary is really important. So often tutors as well are saying, oh yeah, reflection, reflecting, and everyone's like, what the heck, So I'm going to go through the reflective process. And obviously, there are many definitions in terms of the word, but we're not looking at literally reflection, reflection on a glass. We're looking at the actual writing practice of what it means. But I thought this was a nice picture to reflect on reflection. And so I'm going to move straight into the next slide. So this is a quotation from John Dewey, who is a very famous educational theorist. And although, this quote is from way back, like 1938, I think it's still really, really relevant because what he did was he looked at traditional and progressive education, and he looked specifically at reflection. So a lot of what we're doing here when we're reflecting is, of course, we're looking back. But as a student, especially as a university student, you are looking at your experiences as a student, your learning. So we don't just learn from what we do, but we learn from thinking about what we do. So I thought this was a really good way to open up that idea. And this often is quite a nice way as well, if you're a student, to help you get some grasp, if you like, or some idea of what actually you're going to be writing about or thinking about. So essentially the word experience is really, really important here. And what is it? What is reflective writing in practice? So it's a style of writing, yes, but it's also, as I said, it's the way you think about what you're doing. But of course, often at university, you have to write down what you're doing and what you're thinking about what you're doing. So you're writing down what has happened, what's happening to you, and so on. And it's to enable you to help you think about your processes and the choices you're making as you're going through a project or as you're going through your research. So it's really, really important to feel confident writing reflectively. And it's actually not as complex as it can sometimes seem. And as I said, it's thinking about the processes and your decisions. And often you're thinking about, what did I do badly? I've read many reflective statements or reflective blogs where people are saying, oh, you know, this was wrong and that was wrong. But it's not just about that. It's about your strengths as well. What were you good at? What was well for you? What was successful? And on this particular slide, I'm going to just highlight down here as well, this thing here where it says, oops, I've skipped to prejudices. So this word may seem a bit strange when you think about reflection, but actually it isn't, because often we have our thought patterns already in place before we start doing something. So part of reflection as well is thinking about that. So you think, okay, my idea is this, but then as you go through your process, your research or your practical process, actually, yeah, no, these things I thought are actually not real. That's not how it is, about yourself or about your practice, whatever it might be. So it's also quite nice to think about that. But as I said, the main focus is on process, is on decision, strengths and your weaknesses. And as you start to write reflectively, focusing on those things will really help you be able to express what you want to say in your reflection. So as it says on this slide, knowing these things will really help you. And so why do it? I've probably already explained that in many ways, because being a student is about considering your learning, and there is a reason. So it's about writing down your thoughts, and it's about thinking about what you're doing as you do it, which can be a real challenge, particularly when you're caught up in what you're doing. So it's a good idea to start thinking about a journal or a notebook, somewhere you can start getting things down. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just writing what you need to say in that moment is good, and that all helps you later on. So why write? Well, also because you're thinking about your conscious decisions. So your conscious decisions. Now, of course, if I was in the classroom, I would probably be right now saying to you guys, I could even do it because we've got chat, you know, what is a conscious decision? So a conscious decision is where you make that choice in that moment in time. But sometimes they're not conscious. Sometimes you think intuitively, you think, oh, okay, in this moment, I'm going to do it like this. You know, you haven't really thought about the process too much. That's okay. That's good. That's part of being a creative person, or part of research processes. And it can become a record of your thoughts. As I said earlier, if you have a journal or a blog or a notebook, of course, you know, often people prefer now to write digitally. So having a blog is helpful, or even just, you know, something on your desktop that's always there that you can just go to and type in. So while you're working, it's good to try and spend a little bit of time to do that. Perhaps not every day, because that's not always possible. It's not practical, but certainly at least I'd say once a week, you know, start thinking, oh yeah, what happened this week? And then you can start writing that down. And as it says here, it's something to remind you about the things that you're doing and the areas you want to look at and explore. And it's all about the future. It's all about furthering your development into the future. And it also acts as a conclusion. So it helps you clarify everything for you. So when you finally have to write up your research process, you're able to then, you've got your notebook or your journal or your blog, and you've got everything in one place. So you can go, okay, I'm going to pull these things out, and now it's going to start to really make sense. And that really helps you as you go forward. So it's all about what you've learned, how you can use this, and always thinking about the next challenge, you know, where you're going to go with this stuff. Okay, so Gibbs reflective cycle. Now, this is a really, really useful way to start thinking reflectively. It's a very popular way to enter into this type of writing. So for example, you will see here it says description. So I'm doing a little circle around there. Description, what happened? Now, I'll come back to that, because what's important then is you move into your feelings. Now, feelings, okay, we don't mean like, oh, I had a really, you know, bad day, I fell out with my boyfriend type feeling. It's more like, how did I feel about what I just did there? Was that good? Was that successful? So whatever it might be. So if you're a university student, let's say you're in a process of making something and you tried something new, or you're in the process of some research and you wanted to ask some questions of somebody, or you read a journal, or you read a book, you know, how did that feel? Was it helpful? Was the information useful or not? You know, there are lots and lots of ways you can tap into that. Then you move into evaluating that. So you go into, okay, what was good about that? You know, was it useful? So for example, I read this book and it was like really interesting, but it's not useful for my research, but I really enjoyed it. You can put that in a reflective statement. Of course, you don't want to go into too much detail about those things, but you know, it's all about the positives and the negatives. And then you can move into your analysis of that. Can you make sense of this? Then you conclude. Then finally, as I said, you go into what's the future going to be like for me? Now I've got all this information. Now I've done all these things. Okay, where am I going with this? And then you go back to the beginning. And one thing to note is with description, be very careful that you don't get stuck in just describing. This is a common sort of error. We've all done it. You know, you just described, today I did this, blah, 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 etc., etc. You have to move on from that if you want to be a successful reflective writer. And there's nothing wrong with describing things, but you know, you've got to move on and be a bit more analytical and really engage with what you're doing with the process. Okay, I guess any questions in chat? Does anyone want to say anything before I go on? Anything? No? Okay, I'm going to move on.
Actually, it looks like we do have a question here from Melanie.
Oh, okay, thanks.
The question is, how do you move people from descriptive to analytic writing?
Yeah, that is a really good question. Well, this is where you sort of, so for example, you start being more critical of what you've been reading and what you've been doing. So rather than just saying, you know, I read this, it was interesting, it's really helpful, I agree with the person, you also want to say, well, yeah, this is what I think about what this person said, or this is what I think about this process. You start putting yourself in it as much as what you're getting out from it in terms of knowledge. So that can be a good way to start getting into the analysis, thinking more in depth about what you've been looking at, rather than just saying, this is what it is. Yeah. Does that help answer that question?
It does. And I also think
Thanks, Mel.
Because kind of what you're saying is like you put, you know, I think a lot of students, they put so much power into whatever they're reading and stuff like that has all the authority, but actually your experiences also have an authority, and you're kind of interacting with the text rather than just letting the text be everything and it's always right and I don't have to critically engage with it. Anyway, I'll be quiet now.
No, exactly. Thank you. No, you're absolutely true. That's so important. You're right, because yeah, I mean, I've done that even myself as when I was studying. Yeah, because we're like, oh, these people are the experts. They know everything, you know? So yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. Thank you. Great. Okay. So I'm going to move on to the next one. And I've just realized I've still got my funny circly things. So I'm just going to see if I can erase those guys. Yeah, good. Okay. So, and so it's, as I said, it's a writing style. So often at university, we teach and we talk about writing styles, academic writing, and reflective writing is a very specific way to write, and it can be a challenge. As I said earlier, it can be a blog or a logbook, which is actually an assessed piece of writing. This is very common where I work because I teach a lot of art and design students, so they're required to make these very, very impressive blogs. And they're going to be assessed on it, and they have to be reflecting on their design process or their creative process. And it's usually informal. Now, this is also something that's key, because what is informal writing? We can talk a lot about these differences between formal and informal. And informal writing basically means, you're using I, and you're being a little bit more relaxed with your expressions. You're not really using a lot of referencing perhaps, and that kind of style is informal, for want of a better sort of word, because I'm not so confident or familiar sometimes with that feeling of informal. I'd rather use another word, but it's the word we've got right now, so it works. And it can be a reflective statement, which is can be up to 300 or 500 words. And also, which is key for many, is it's part of an essay, or it's a chapter in your dissertation. So it's where you're talking about your research process, visually and creatively. Again, bearing in mind I'm focusing a lot here on art and design because that's what I teach. However, whatever your subject, its process is the key word here, really. And you're looking at your primary and your secondary research. And this is where the analysis can come in quite heavily, and your evaluation of that. So those are the styles I've highlighted. There may be others, but they're the key ones, the main ones. So often, students will say to me, how do I write reflectively? And then I look at some writing, and it is descriptive, and there's a little bit of, as I said earlier, this sort of negative, oh, I did this really badly, I should do this differently. And yes, that is in essence reflection. However, to really go into it well, you need to be thinking in more depth. So it's step by step. If you think about it in a step-by-step linear way, that's a really good way to tap into what you're trying to do. So if we go back to Gibbs, for example, following those steps will help you get into that linear, this is what I did, and this is my feeling, and so on. So you're thinking about why you did things, why you made the choices you made, and so on, and how you can develop. And also, the challenges that you're facing, for good or bad. There could be a challenge that really was before doing it, you thought, oh my goodness, and then you did it, and then it was like, wow, that's amazing, I did a really good job, great, woohoo. So you want to celebrate that, in your reflection. And thinking of it as a journaling exercise, as I said earlier, and also free writing. I really like this phrase. Maybe this is what I prefer to informal, to be honest, free writing, because what you're doing is you're really just getting those things down, your thoughts down, whatever they might be. And I often say to my students, because of course, using another language, you want to get it right. But the first time, don't worry about spelling, don't worry about all of those things, your grammar, whether or not there was a full stop in the right place or whatever. Just get it down. Some people as well quite like to start off doing a mind map, which is also a really good way. You do your mind map first, and then you free write, and then you get into it. So, it is a flexible way to start. It shouldn't be a prescribed, oh, I must sit down now and write this in a step-by-step fashion. And that's part of, the process. Okay, so now here we've got 10 questions to get you started. So these are my top 10 questions that will really help you start to think about what you're doing and how you're doing it. and they follow these same patterns. So you describe, what did you start doing? What did you do next? So it could be something really simple, like, what did you start doing? I went to the library. Well, of course, maybe not in these times, we can't go to the library. I went on to the library search that my university has, and I looked up some electronic sources. And I found these books, and I was looking for this in particular, etc., etc. Just write that down, you know. You can write down the names of the books, who you were looking for, and so on. You can be very, very basic and very descriptive straight off. And then you move into the more technical stuff, as if you like. What did you do after that? So maybe you found a chapter that was really interesting, you took some notes, then you started asking yourself some questions, and so on. Now, you will see here on my slide again, because it is for mainly art and design students, but I am aware that I could have perhaps edited that a little bit, but I've put color, medium, technique, software. This is whatever, you know, whatever you're doing, whatever method, whatever type of student you are, you can replace that, obviously, and so on. So again, if I was in class, I would say now to you guys who had to prepare a reflective statement, we would spend quite a lot of time going through these. I'd give you at least, you know, 10, 20, as long as you need minutes to have a good look through these, write down some answers, and then we can share it. But I'm aware that right now we're not quite in that situation. But please do bear in mind, if you have got to write a reflective statement, take a screenshot or whatever, and you can have a go later. Yeah, any comments, any questions right now about this?
Okay,
I know.
it's me again. I just want to say, I think these questions are really great. I could see them easily transferring to students in other disciplines. I've been working with engineering undergraduate students. They really struggle getting started writing, but they have to write. And I can really see these just kind of moving to that discipline. Anyway, just thought I'd share.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's quite simple as well, you know, and this, again, it's breaking it down into making it a simple activity rather than a bit of a minefield, you know, and absolutely, then there's something real and concrete to work with to move on into the, you know, the further later stages. And then they can always be there to go back to, obviously, you know, for later projects or throughout a project, throughout a research process. Yeah. Okay, so now, a quality piece of reflective writing. Yeah, I mean, a quality piece, that makes it sound like it has to be a masterpiece. it really, as long as you are saying what you feel you need to say, you know, you're going to be okay. So it's about self-assessment and understanding yourself, which, you know, is a challenge for anybody, quite frankly. So, you know, when you're put into this situation, having to do that can take a while to feel confident. Think, yeah, okay, yeah, actually, yeah, this work, that would, but you know, it's about, yeah, accessing your own skills. So evidence of awareness of personal learning processes. Have you talked about your personal learning process? If you have, brilliant, yay. Consideration of how and why learning changed. What changed for you? Something might have happened along the way and that gave you the key to everything. Evidence of appropriate and honest appraisal, so that you're being honest with yourself as well as with, you know, the process. Again, this, you know, be careful, because it doesn't have to be always negative. It can be always positive, should be. And your limits. So this is also very common, particularly in dissertations where you're looking at the limits of what you're trying to do. But yeah, it's all there. And finally, reflection is about making connections. So you're connecting between what you thought you knew or what you assumed you knew, or going back to the earlier word of your prejudices about what you think you knew, and then the current knowledge that you've gained. And if we go back to also that idea of being critical and analytical, so you've gained that knowledge and now you're moving forward. Connections between themes and topics. And again, this is very similar to the earlier one, but integrating prior knowledge. So bringing it all together, or all coming in together. And providing relevant examples to prove that knowledge. So you could do a bit of referencing here, some examples even, but as I say, this is where it can be, you've got to be careful because reflection isn't really about that style of heavy referenced writing, but you might want to put in a quotation or something else. So yeah, this was again, yeah, I guess this might be relevant for any discipline, as Mel just said, integrating styles. So a lot of what you're doing when you're writing in academic life is a combination of writing styles. So it is the formal, you know, the classic, the literature review and the methodology, and you've referenced everything beautifully. But it's also the less formal, where you've got the analysis and the evaluation. That's not to say analysis and evaluation isn't in the formal as well, but it's a different type of analysis with reflection, as you've just seen. And being aware of when to use which style. So that's a process of elimination in many ways. But if you've got your reflective writing down, you've got some notes, you can start to get everything into an order, hopefully. That's the idea. Okay, so my final slide. Enjoy the process and good luck, always. And keep looking at the sky and the clouds. And I wish you all the luck. And thank you so much for letting me speak. And big up to Mel and Amy again.
Oh, thank you. That was so great. And it really did. It was meaningful for me, Melanie, when you mentioned, you know, this is so useful for engineers or in business writing, where sometimes, especially if you're writing in a second language, it can be hard to focus in on what you're trying to say. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we are going to just take a minute or two to flip on over to our next presenter. Let me go ahead and pull up my screen. Thank you again, Joe. Thank you for everybody who's participating and listening in. We really appreciate having you here. If you can, we humbly ask that you please donate money, time, goods to your local food bank or to one of these food bank charities. We are hoping to raise a little bit of money as part of this teach-a-thon.